The morning air off Lake Michigan carried the kind of cold that settled into tools and made metal stubborn. On Ashford Lane, a cul-de-sac of limestone facades, copper gutters, and driveways that cost more per square foot than most people's mortgages. A man in a faded canvas jacket knelt beside an irrigation control vault, sunk into the frost-hardened lawn of the largest house on the block. His name was Daniel Hayes. He was 38 years old. He drove a '09 Ram with a cracked dashboard and a child's drawing taped above the glove compartment. A lopsided son, a tall stick figure, a small stick figure holding hands. His work boots had been resoled twice. The jacket had a tear at the left elbow he'd sewn shut himself with dark thread that didn't quite match. He worked without hurrying. Around him, the neighborhood was waking up. A landscaping crew arrived 3 houses down. A woman in exercise clothes walked a retriever on a long lead. 2 men in suits waited at the corner for a car service. Nobody looked at Daniel. He was the kind of invisible that wealth creates without meaning to the person doing the work that keeps everything running. Noticed only when the work stops. His daughter sat on the curb 6 feet away, her backpack in her lap, a library book open across it. She was 7 years old. Her name was Lily. She had her father's dark eyes and the habit of watching people carefully before she spoke. She looked up from her book and studied the back of her father's head. "What's wrong with it?" she asked. "Pressure regulators seized," Daniel said, without turning. "And somebody installed the wrong valve on the secondary line. Iron fitting on a copper manifold. Different metals corrode each other. Over time. How long has it been like that? Based on the corrosion?" He tilted his head slightly. 3, 4 years. Whoever inspected it either didn't look carefully or didn't know what they were looking at. Lily considered this. "Which one is worse?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "The second one," he said finally. He reached into his canvas roll of tools, selected a hex wrench, and went back to work. The house behind him, number 14 Ashford Lane, had sold 3 weeks ago for $4.2 million. The sale had been a small event in the neighborhood, the kind discussed briefly over coffee and then forgotten. What had not been forgotten was that the new owner had arrived like a weather system. 3 moving vans, a decorator, 2 assistants, and a structural engineer dispatched before a single piece of furniture crossed the threshold. The property management company that handled the vacant estate had called Daniel's number from a laminated referral list. He charged honest rates. He showed up when he said he would. He didn't talk more than necessary. These were rarer qualities than they should have been. He had a small business, Hayes Mechanical, sole proprietorship, operating out of his van, and a storage unit he rented for $40 a month. He did irrigation systems, boiler diagnostics, pump installations, pressure testing, the kind of work that required patience and spatial reasoning and a tolerance for confined spaces. He did not advertise. He did not need to. He reached deeper into the vault and wrapped his hand around the main manifold. His fingers read the metal the way a doctor reads, a pulse not looking, just knowing. There it is. He felt the hairline fracture where no fracture should exist, not in the metal itself, but in the way the whole assembly had been thinking. The design was trying to do 2 things at once and had been losing the argument quietly for years. "Lily," he said, "I need you to hand me the needle nose. The long one." She closed her book, opened the side pocket of his tool bag, found it by shape without looking, and passed it over her father's shoulder. "Thanks, Bug. You're welcome, Ba." She reopened her book. He went back to work. The black SUV turned onto Ashford Lane at 8:47 a.m. It moved the way expensive cars often do in expensive neighborhoods, not fast, but with absolute certainty, as if the road itself had been paved specifically for it. It stopped in front of number 14. The driver got out first, opened the rear door, and stood back. The woman who stepped out was in her mid-40s. She wore a charcoal wool coat, heeled boots that clicked on the pavement with the precision of a metronome, and carried a phone in one hand and a coffee in the other. Her hair was pulled back. Her expression was the kind that professionals spend years developing. Permanently evaluative, revealing nothing. Her name was Margot Weston. She was the founder and chief executive of Weston Meridian Group, a real estate development firm that had reshaped 3 neighborhoods in Chicago's north suburbs, and was currently in the middle of a commercial project that covered 12 city blocks. Her name appeared in business publications with adjectives like formidable and precise. Her company had 47 employees and a culture that was, by all accounts, demanding. She had bought number 14 Ashford Lane not because she needed a larger house, but because it was the kind of acquisition that made a particular statement to a particular audience about a particular kind of arrival. She had not yet moved in. She stood at the end of the driveway and surveyed the property with the focused attention of someone calculating square footage at a glance. Then she noticed Daniel. She walked toward him, heels clicking. "Is this the irrigation issue?" she asked. Not to him specifically. To the general vicinity of the problem. The property manager, a soft-spoken man named Gary Chu, who had arrived 20 minutes earlier and was standing near the front steps, moved forward. "Miss Weston, yes, the pump assembly serving the rear and side irrigation zones failed last Tuesday. We called. I can see what's happening," Margot said. She looked down at Daniel. "How long is this going to take?" Daniel didn't look up. "Couple hours, maybe 3. We have walk-through appointments starting at 11. Shouldn't be a problem." She stood there a moment longer. Something about the quality of his focus entirely on the machine, none of it on her, seemed to produce a mild irritation. "What company are you with?" "Hayes Mechanical." She waited, as if expecting more. A website. A business card. A pitch. Daniel had already looked back into the vault. Margot turned to Gary. "Did you vet this contractor? He comes highly recommended. I asked if you vetted him. He has references, yes. Several properties in the... I want someone with commercial credentials on site as well. Call Meridian's facilities team and have them send a structural engineer and a mechanical lead by 10. The system is residential, Miss Weston. It wouldn't typically... 10 o'clock, she said. She walked toward the front entrance, phone already raised. Lily watched her go. Then she looked at her father's back. He hadn't moved. Hadn't shifted. Hadn't done anything except continue working, the hex wrench turning slow and deliberate. The sound of metal on metal, quiet and patient. "She didn't say good morning," Lily said, quietly. Said Daniel. "Is that normal?" He thought about it. "Sometimes," he said. Lily looked back down at her book, but she wasn't reading. She was listening to the sound of her father working, and to the expensive click of heels fading through a front door that had never belonged to anyone who knelt in the dirt. By 9:30, Ashford Lane had developed an audience. This happened in wealthy neighborhoods, the way it happened everywhere else, incrementally, with everyone pretending it wasn't happening. The landscaping crew 3 houses down had migrated slightly in their work. The leaf blower now aimed vaguely in the direction of the vault. The woman with the retriever had completed her walk and was somehow on her second one. A neighbor named Philip Greer, 60, retired, owner of the largest hedge collection on the street, had materialized near his mailbox with no apparent purpose. The 2 men in suits had gotten into their car service, but one had rolled the window down. Gary Chu stood near the front steps drinking his second coffee and watching everything carefully. Daniel worked. He had removed the primary regulator housing and laid its components across a cloth he'd spread on the frozen grass. Each piece sat in order. Left to right, first to last, the way a surgeon lays out tools. He examined each one with the same unhurried attention, turning some toward the light, setting others aside. At 9:42, Margot returned from inside the house. She was on a call. She walked to the edge of the lawn, finished the call, and surveyed the disassembled components spread across the cloth. "You've taken the whole thing apart," she said. "I have." "Why?" Daniel picked up the pressure regulator body and showed her the interior. "The spring seat is cracked. That's the immediate failure. But the design of the manifold junction right here," he pointed with one finger, not touching, "has been routing water pressure incorrectly since installation. Whoever put this in reversed the primary and secondary supply lines. The system has been fighting itself." Margot stared at the component. "So it was installed wrong." "Yes." "By who?" I don't know. I wasn't here. She looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time. There was a pause in which something recalibrated behind her eyes. Then the Meridian team arrived. Two of them. A mechanical engineer named Brendan Sachs, mid-30s, polo shirt, carrying a tablet, and a structural consultant named Tara Voigt, who immediately began photographing the property's foundation lines without speaking. Brendan crouched beside the open vault and looked at the components on the cloth. "What happened here?" he asked Daniel. "Reverse supply manifold. Cracked spring seat. Corrosion between the iron secondary valve and the copper main." Brendan picked up the regulator housing without asking. Turned it over. Frowned. "These are non-standard threads," he said. "They are. Where'd this system come from? I don't recognize the assembly design." "It's not common," Daniel said. "Is it a custom fabrication?" "You could say that." Brendan set it down and typed something on his tablet. "I'm not finding a manufacturer match. This is going to complicate parts sourcing. I brought replacement components." Brendan looked up. "You had parts for a non-standard system you'd never seen before?" "I had parts that will work." "That's not the same thing. The threads are compatible with a 1998 ISO metric standard that most pressure fittings from that era share. The regulator can be adapted. The manifold just needs the supply lines reversed and the iron valve replaced with a brass gate, which I also have." Silence. Brendan glanced at Margot. She was watching Daniel. "How do you know the threads are isometric?" Brendan asked. Daniel picked up the regulator housing. He rotated it slightly and pointed to a small mark on the interior flange. A tiny symbol. Barely visible. Stamped into the metal. "Machining mark," he said. "Standard European industrial spec from the mid-90s. I've seen it before." "Where?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He set the component back on the cloth, in its place, in the order. "I used to work with systems like this," he said. Brendan studied him. Something shifted in his expression, not skepticism, exactly. More like recalibration. Lily had been watching Brendan with the same quiet attention she gave everything. She leaned over slightly and said, in a voice pitched just for her father, "He doesn't believe you." "I know," Daniel said, equally quiet. "Are you going to explain?" "No." She considered this. "Good," she said. By 10:15, the situation on the lawn had achieved a particular social texture. Brendan had positioned himself as the authoritative technical presence. He spoke with the ease of someone accustomed to being the most credentialed person in the room. He used the word protocol twice and specification 4 times in 20 minutes. He had called his office and was expecting a second Meridian engineer. Daniel worked. He had begun reassembling the primary manifold, working slowly, each connection hand-tight first and then tool-finished. He did not explain what he was doing. He did not narrate. Philip Greer, from his position near the mailbox, had drifted slightly closer. He was watching the disassembled components on the cloth with an expression that was harder to read than simple curiosity. Margot stood back. She had stopped talking. Brendan crouched beside Daniel. "You're installing the replacement regulator backward," he said. Daniel's hands didn't pause. "The inlet port faces the secondary line in this configuration," Brendan continued. "Standard installation would have it facing the primary. Standard installation is what caused this problem," Daniel said. "I understand that, but the primary supply in this manifold runs at 60 psi. The regulator's rated maximum is 55. Whoever installed this originally ran it with the inlet on the primary. That's why the spring seat failed." He made one half-turn with the wrench. Reversed inlet drops the load to 48 psi on the pressure side. Inside the spec, Brendan was quiet. "That's an unusual configuration," he said finally. "Yes, I've never seen it done that way. It's not common." There was a beat. "I'm not sure I'd recommend it," Brendan said. Daniel looked up for the first time in 40 minutes. He looked at Brendan without expression, not hostility, not challenge. Just a very direct, very patient gaze. "Then don't recommend it," he said, and looked back down. Brendan stood. He walked to Margot and spoke quietly. Daniel didn't try to hear. Lily heard some of it, the word unconventional, and the phrase I'd feel more comfortable with before the conversation dropped below her range. Margot listened without expression. The second Meridian engineer arrived at 10:22. His name was Curtis Webb. He was older than Brendan 50s, gray at the temples, hands that had actually held tools at some point in his career. He looked at the assembly on the cloth, looked at the open vault, looked at Daniel's hands working, and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What's that mark on the manifold body?" Brendan looked over. "What mark?" "There," Curtis pointed. "On the outer casing, near the junction port. That stamp." Everyone leaned in slightly. Daniel's hands continued working. The mark was small. It had been partially obscured by years of accumulated grime. Curtis crouched and looked at it closely. He took out his phone and turned on the flashlight. His face changed. "Brendan," he said, in a different tone. "What?" "Come here." Brendan crouched beside him. The flashlight illuminated the casing. The mark was now visible. Not a manufacturer's stamp, not a machining code, but a small, careful, hand-engraved symbol, a stylized H above a horizontal line, precise as a signature. "What is that?" Margot asked. Curtis said nothing for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "I think I've seen that mark before." The work was nearly done. Daniel had reconnected the manifold, replaced the valve, seated the new regulator in its reversed configuration, and was now tightening the final compression fitting on the secondary line. His movements had not changed in 3 hours. Same pace, same precision, same economy of motion. The audience on Ashford Lane had grown. Philip Greer had come all the way to the edge of the property now, no longer pretending to check his mail. The landscaping crew had given up any pretense of working. Gary Chu had called someone on his phone and was waiting for a callback. Lily had finished her book. She was watching Curtis. Curtis was still crouched beside the removed casing, turning it over in his hands. He had stopped talking. He seemed to be working through something privately. Brendan had taken several photographs of the mark and sent them somewhere. Margot stood with her arms crossed, coffee long cold, watching Daniel. "You said you used to work with systems like this," she said. "I did." "For who?" Daniel made the last quarter turn on the compression fitting. He set down the wrench. "For myself," he said. He picked up the test gauge from the cloth and connected it to the inspection port. "I designed this system," he said. The lawn went very quiet. Even the leaf blower 3 houses down had stopped. Lily looked up at her father's back. Margot uncrossed her arms. "I'm sorry?" "This system." Daniel indicated the assembly with a small movement of his head. "I designed it 12 years ago. For a client who was building this house, he wanted a multi-zone irrigation system that could handle the grade differential on the east lawn. There's about a 4-foot drop from the main line to the lower zones without losing pressure consistency. Standard manifold designs couldn't do it, so I built something custom." He watched the gauge needle. It climbed steadily, 51 psi, 53. It settled at 54.5. "It held for almost a decade," he said. "The failure happened because the iron valve was installed during a repair probably about 4 years ago, based on the corrosion by someone who didn't know the original system spec. It's not uncommon. You hand a system off, and eventually someone else touches it without the context." He disconnected the gauge. He began putting his tools away, each one back in its exact position in the roll. Curtis stood. He was holding the casing carefully, like something that had been unexpectedly valuable. "You're Daniel Hayes," he said. It wasn't a question, but it had the sound of something that was checking itself against something it had stored for a long time. "Yes, I studied the Halcyon manifold design in grad school," Curtis said. "At Northwestern, Professor Alderman taught it as an example of pressure distribution engineering. It's in at least 2 industry textbooks." He paused. "There's a signature on the original patent filing. Same mark." "Yes, you patented this at 26, Curtis said. 25, Daniel said. The roll of tools closed with a soft snap. Margot's expression had shifted into something more complicated. The permanent evaluation was still there, but something underneath it had moved. "Why are you doing residential irrigation repairs?" she asked. The question came out without its professional armor. It was just a direct question, and it had more human confusion in it than she probably intended. Daniel picked up the roll of tools and turned to face her for the first time, fully, not partially, not over his shoulder, all the way. "Because someone needs to," he said. He carried the tool roll to the van. Here is what had happened earlier before the mark. Before Curtis. Before the audience that the sequence of events had not made space for until now. At 9:08 a.m., Margot had returned from inside the house for the first time with a second coffee and a shorter temper. A call had not gone well. There was a zoning variance on the commercial project that was threatening a 14-week delay. Her morning had been absorbing that impact in increments. She had walked to the edge of the vault where Daniel was working. She had looked at him, the faded jacket, the cloth spread on the frozen grass, the tools laid out with that particular precision she hadn't registered yet. And she had said something. She had said, "Is this the best they could send?" Not to Gary, directly at Daniel. And then, louder, with the particular carrying quality of a voice accustomed to conference rooms. "I paid $4 million for this property, and they send a handyman?" There had been a laugh from somewhere. The man with the window rolled down, probably. Or one of the landscaping crew. Daniel had not responded. He had reached into the vault and continued working. Lily had heard it. She had been sitting on the curb with her book, and she had heard every word, and she had gone very still in the way that children go still when they are deciding whether to cry or whether to do something else. She had looked at the back of her father's head. He was still working. His hands were still moving with exactly the same patience, the same unhurried precision. The insult had passed through him the way wind passes through a gap, present for a moment, then gone, leaving everything in the same position. Lily had made her decision. She had not cried. She had opened her book, but her eyes had been moving across the same line for 20 minutes before they started moving again for real. This is the part of the story that doesn't make the headlines in the neighborhood retellings. The part that happens before the revelation, before the reversal, the small private injury, witnessed only by one person who was 7 years old and too young to know what she was witnessing, and old enough to know exactly what she was witnessing. This is the part that Daniel carried, not bitterly. He had learned long ago that bitterness was weight, and he had things to carry that mattered more. But he carried it the way a well-made structure carries load, distributed. Quiet. Deep in the material. The mark on the casing had been there all morning. No one had looked. The van wouldn't start on the first try. It did this sometimes in the cold. Daniel turned the key again, and the engine caught with a sound like a man clearing his throat before saying something important. He sat for a moment in the driver's seat. Lily was beside him, backpack on her lap again, watching the house through the windshield. Several people were still on the lawn. Curtis was talking to Brendan with animated hands. Gary Chu was on his phone. Margot Weston was standing alone at the edge of the driveway. "Curtis knows who you are," Lily said. "He does now. Did you know he would?" Daniel thought about this honestly. "I didn't know. I thought it was possible. Does it matter?" He put the van in gear. "To what?" Lily considered the question with a 7-year-old's seriousness, which is not so different from anyone else's. "To you," she said. "Does it matter to you that they know now?" The van moved slowly down Ashford Lane. "Knowing doesn't change the pump," Daniel said. "The pump works because the work is right. It worked that way this morning, before anyone knew. It'll work that way tonight, but they treated you differently after." "Yes, and that's not fair." "That it took knowing." "No," Daniel said. "It's not fair." They stopped at the corner. He looked at his daughter. She was watching the street ahead with that careful, cataloging attention. The same attention she'd given the woman in the expensive boots, and the man with the textbook knowledge of his father's work, and the lopsided son she'd drawn and taped above the glove. "Compartment, does it make you angry?" Lily asked. "Sometimes," he said. "What do you do with it?" He thought about the van, the storage unit, the folded cloth spread on frozen grass, the tools in their order. "I put it somewhere useful," he said. She seemed to understand this. She opened her book. He turned onto the main road. 3 blocks behind them, Margot Weston was still standing at the edge of her driveway, holding a cold coffee cup and looking at the street where the van had been. She went inside. The house was in the intermediate state of all houses being renovated into homes. Furniture in wrong rooms, walls half-painted, the smell of fresh plaster mixing with old air. The structural consultant's notes were on the kitchen counter. The decorator's samples were arranged on the dining room floor. Margot walked through it without looking at any of it. She went to the back windows and looked at the rear lawn. The vault was closed. The grass around it had been carefully smoothed back. The only evidence that anything had happened was a faint imprint on the frost where the tool cloth had been laid a precise rectangle, edges clean. She pulled out her phone and searched. Daniel Hayes, mechanical engineer, Chicago. The first result was a patent filing from 1999. H-manifold pressure distribution system. Inventor, Daniel A. Hayes. Age at filing, 25. The second was a brief mention in an engineering trade publication from 2007. Hayes, formerly of Meridian Systems Group. She stopped. She went back. Meridian Systems Group. The same name as her company Weston Meridian Group, which she had named a decade ago as a tribute to a firm she'd studied as a case study in graduate school. A firm known for precision engineering and a culture of unusual technical standards. A firm that had dissolved in 2009. She searched further. The picture that came up was from a conference program. 7 people in a row. Third from left. A younger man, early 30s, dark-haired, with the same very still quality around the eyes. She looked at it for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Gary Chu. "The contractor this morning," she said, when he answered. "Daniel Hayes?" "Yes. I need his contact information." There was a pause. "Of course. Is there a problem with the repair?" "No," she said. She looked through the back windows at the clean rectangle of pressed frost on her lawn. "There's no problem with the repair." He was 2 jobs east when she reached him. A condo complex on Damon Avenue with a failed boiler circulator pump. 4th floor, Unit 4C. The building super had propped open the stairwell door and left. Daniel worked alone in the utility closet with a headlamp and a small pipe wrench, and the particular focus that came naturally in tight, warm, mechanical spaces. His phone lit up on the floor beside his knee. Unknown number. He let it go. It rang again 3 minutes later. He picked up. "Mr. Hayes," she said. "This is Margot Weston." He said nothing. "I wanted to speak with you about this morning." He set down the wrench. He sat back against the utility closet wall and waited. She said, "I owe you an apology." The word hung in the phone's silence for a moment. "What I said this morning in front of other people was wrong," she said. "It wasn't justified. And it wasn't fair. I was frustrated about something unrelated, and I directed it at you in a way that I'm not comfortable with in retrospect." Daniel said, "All right. I also looked into your background this afternoon. I didn't know. I had no idea who you were or what your history was. And I recognized that the right thing is to say that it shouldn't have mattered. The way I spoke to you this morning should have been inappropriate, regardless of your credentials." Daniel said nothing. "I wanted you to know that," she said. "I heard you," he said. "A pause. I'd also like to offer you a consulting arrangement," she said. Weston Meridian Group has 3 commercial properties under development. Mechanical systems, pressure management, HVAC integration. We've been working with an outside engineering firm that is, frankly, producing results that your team would have considered unacceptable 20 years ago. "I don't have a team," Daniel said. "I'm aware. The arrangement I have in mind is flexible. You'd consult on specifications, review installation plans, flag problems, before they become your kind of morning." He was quiet. "I'm good at this morning," he said. "I know," she said. "That's not the point." He turned the pipe wrench over in his hand. The boiler ticked and settled in the small room around him. "Why did you name your company after Meridian Systems Group?" he asked. A longer pause. "I studied the firm in graduate school," she said. "It was known for building things that lasted. Things that were right. not just compliant. I admired that. The firm dissolved because the founder walked away, he said. Margot said nothing. He walked away because his wife died, and he had a daughter who was 4 months old, and he decided that the things he'd been building weren't the most important thing he could be building anymore. Daniel said this without weight, as a simple sequence of facts. The engineering didn't stop. It just moved. To irrigation repairs, Margot said. And boiler pumps, he said. And radiant heating systems. And water pressure diagnostics for buildings where people live. Another silence. I'll send you the project specifications, she said. Read them, or don't. I'm not asking you to decide tonight. Okay, he said. The rate would be, I'll tell you what's fair after I read the specs, he said. She paused. All right. He picked up the pipe wrench. Miss Weston. Yes. The apology was the important part, he said, not the job. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice had something in it that wasn't there before, not softness exactly, but an honesty that stripped some of the professional finish off the words. I know, she said. That's why I said it first. She had 23 minutes of homework, and then she had a question. Daniel sat across from her at the kitchen table while she worked through the math problems. He ate the last of a container of leftover soup and read through the project specifications. Margot had emailed 3 attachments, each one denser than the last, written in the language of people who were trying to sound more certain than their measurements justified. He made notes in the margins of a printed page. Not corrections exactly. Observations. The kind that would require the author to make corrections themselves. Done, Lily said. She closed her workbook, then opened it again. Actually, can you check the last one? He checked it. The long division's right. The remainder's wrong. She looked, made a small sound of annoyance, and erased. Bah, she said, while she was still writing. Mem, that lady called you. He looked up. I heard, she said. When you were on the phone in the hallway. She apologized. He set down the specification printout. Yes. Lily finished the problem. She closed the workbook. She folded her hands on the table in the precise way she did when she was about to say something she'd been thinking about for a while. Do you think she meant it? Lily asked. I think she meant it the way people mean things when they have to, he said. Which is still meaning it. Just in a harder way. Lily thought about this. There are different ways to mean things, she asked. Yes. Like how? Daniel set down his pen. He considered the table for a moment. Some people mean things because the meaning is just there, he said. Easy. It was always going to come out that way. And some people mean things because they had to work to get to the meaning, had to recognize something uncomfortable first. The second kind is harder. But sometimes it goes deeper. Lily was quiet. Which kind was she? The second kind, he said. I think. Is that enough? To what? She pressed her lips together slightly, the way she did when she was being careful with words. To forgive her. Daniel looked at his daughter for a moment. I already did, he said. She seemed surprised. When? This morning, he said. When she said it, that fast? Carrying things around is heavy, he said. You know that. She did know that. She thought about it. But you were still sad, she said. After. In the van. You can be sad and forgiven at the same time, he said. Sad is about what happened. Forgiveness is about what happens next. She turned this over. 7-year-old hands and grown-up concepts. The same careful attention she gave everything. Okay, she said finally. That makes sense. She pulled her backpack toward her and took out a folded piece of paper, something she'd drawn at school, it looked like, and unfolded it on the table. It was a drawing. 2 figures. A tall one with tools in a belt. A small one beside it. Below them, in careful capital letters. My dad fixes things. She slid it across the table. Daniel looked at it for a long time. Can I put this in the van? He asked. I already drew one for there, she said. That one's for here. He taped it to the wall above the table where they ate. It stayed there. A week later, the first Weston Meridian specification sat reviewed and annotated on Daniel's workbench in the storage unit. 14 pages. 41 notes. 9 of them were structural, meaning they would require the author to re-engineer a section. 3 of them were the kind that would have caused failures within 18 months. 2 of them were the kind that would have caused failures nobody ever traced back to the original decision. He had not called Margot to discuss them yet. He would, but he was working through a radiant heating diagnostic on a 1960s residential building in Wicker Park. First, a building with 62 units and a heating system that had been modified 4 times by 4 different people and was now a palimpsest of decades and decisions. He liked buildings like this. They told stories if you knew how to read them. He was in the basement, headlamp on, following the primary circulation loop along the ceiling when he found the section. A 6-foot run of original copper from the first installation, untouched in 60 years, sitting quietly among decades of revisions. The copper had a color that newer work never had, a deep, settled oxidation that meant age and stability at once. He stood there and looked at it for a long time. There was a particular satisfaction in finding the original work. Not nostalgia, not sentiment. The satisfaction of recognizing something that had been done right once and had stayed right, quietly, while everything around it changed and failed, and was corrected and changed again. He pulled out his notebook and made a note. Primary loop segment, J, original 1960, 3 installation, do not replace. Clean and test. He moved on. On Ashford Lane, Philip Greer had said something to his wife over dinner the night of the repair that he had not repeated to anyone and did not intend to. He'd said, "I watched a man take apart something I couldn't have named 3 of the components of, fix it in a way nobody in the yard understood, and then drive away without saying a word about what he knew." His wife had asked what that made him feel. He'd thought about it for a long time. Small, he'd said. In a good way. The way you feel small in front of something real. Curtis Webb had pulled the Halcyon manifold design file from a digital archive and read it again, the full filing. All 47 pages, the kind of technical writing that was also just barely a piece of literature, if you knew enough to read it that way. He had sent Daniel an email. Short, I've been in this industry for 22 years. I've never been in the same physical space as the H manifold before today. Thank you for letting me hold the casing. I hope that's not a strange thing to say. Daniel had replied the next morning. Not strange. That was all. Curtis had read it 3 times. Margot Weston sat in her office at 7:30 on a Thursday morning. She was always first in and looked at the organizational chart of the company she'd built. She was not a sentimental person. She had not built this company on sentiment. She had built it on precision and standards, and the willingness to make difficult decisions quickly and without apology. But she looked at the chart and thought about a man on his knees in the frozen grass, working with complete attention on a system that had been failing for years because someone once, without knowing, had reversed 2 lines. She thought about how long it takes for that kind of error to become visible. She thought about the things in her own structure that might have been reversed. She pulled the 14-page specification, Daniel's annotated copy, which Gary had forwarded, and read through it again. Every note, not defensively, with the same careful, cataloging attention she recognized from somewhere. She picked up her phone. "Gary," she said, "get the mechanical team in the conference room at 9, and tell Brendan to bring his revision notes, the ones from the Damon project." She set down the phone. She opened the specification to page 1. 9 structural notes. She would start with the structural ones. The east lawn of 14 Ashford Lane was green. Properly, evenly, uniformly green, the kind of green that indicates a system running within spec. Every zone receiving what it needs, no more and no less. Margot stood on the back patio with a cup of coffee that was still hot this time. She looked at the lawn. She had moved in 6 weeks ago. The renovation was finished. The structural consultant's notes were filed. The decorator's work was done. The house felt like a house now. From the kitchen behind her, the sound of her assistant arranging the day's schedule. From the driveway, the sound of an arrival. She turned. A faded Ram pickup came to a stop near the side gate, the entrance to the lower yard, where the secondary irrigation junction connected the slope zones to the main system. A follow-up diagnostic, scheduled 3 weeks ago. Part of a maintenance arrangement. Nothing dramatic. Just the work that keeps things running. Daniel got out. He was in the same canvas jacket. The same work boots, resoled twice. He took his tool roll from the passenger seat and walked toward the side gate. He stopped when he saw her. She raised her coffee cup. He nodded once. He went through the gate. She heard the sound of the vault opening, a soft mechanical sound, precise and familiar now and then, the sound of someone at work. Patient, unhurried, exact. She went inside. She went to her desk. She opened the Damon project specifications, now in their third revision, a revision that, according to Brendan, would prevent 3 classes of failure that the original design hadn't anticipated. She began reading. Outside, on the slope of the east lawn, Daniel knelt beside the secondary junction and looked at the zone connections with the same steady attention he gave all things. The pressure was holding correctly. The corrosion from the iron replacement was minimal, another year before it needed attention. He noted this in a small spiral notebook. Date, zone, reading, condition, projected maintenance. He closed the notebook. He sat back for a moment on his heels and looked at the frozen lawn in the early morning light. The grass was brown now, waiting for spring. The system underground was working anyway, pressure moving through lines correctly, carrying what it needed to, where it needed to go, unobserved and efficient. This was the work, not the reveal, not the moment when someone finally looked. The work was this: showing up, paying attention, doing the thing right even when no one was watching, especially when no one was watching, and trusting that the difference between right and wrong eventually shows up in the world, even if it shows up quietly, even if it shows up years after the decision was made. Even if the only evidence is an even green lawn on a cold March morning where a man and his daughter once sat on a curb while someone laughed. He stood. He put away his tools. He went back to his van, started it on the first try. It did that sometimes too, in the cold, and he sat for a moment looking at the drawing above the glove compartment. A lopsided sun. A tall stick figure. A small stick figure. They were still holding hands. He pulled out of the driveway. On Ashford Lane, the day was beginning. The landscaping trucks. The sound of a door opening somewhere. The small, predictable sounds of people in possession of everything they had worked for. Nobody looked at the van, but nobody laughed either. Value doesn't announce itself. It just does the work and waits for the world to catch up.